Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're watching or listening. My name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information that plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we'll provide another installation into our series on the Discourses Concerning Government, which is drafted by Mr. Algernon Sidney. And the reason we are reading over this work and why we'll be reading over Mr. Sidney's other works is because Algernon Sidney, this work in particular, was frequently cited by the founding generation whenever they were building up or constructing the very ideas upon which the U.S. Declaration of Independence was written, on which the respective state constitutions were written, and upon which the Articles of the Confederation and U.S. Constitution were written. So understanding these works, understanding, of course, Algernon Sidney, Montesquieu, are going to be greatly to your benefit in really understanding in depth, not just the explanations of the founders at the time, but the very principles that play rudimentary the very governments that we claim to obey today. So let's go ahead and jump on over to the Discourses Concerning Government. We are going on to Chapter 1, Section 8. If you haven't gone back and watched the previous sections, please do so. As you'll see, frequently throughout this work, almost verbatim, principles and ideas copied into the foundational documents of the union governments and of the state governments. So Section 8 is titled, Nimrod was the first king during the life of Shush, Ham, Shem, and Noah. And what he's going to be addressing here, this is going to be a very quick lecture because most of this section is dedicated to examples, and I encourage you all, please go read the full section. The examples are plentiful, not necessarily required to understand the idea he's demonstrating here, but very beneficial in case you have any sort of skepticism about his claim. What he's addressing directly here is Mr. Robert Filmer's, in his Patriarcha, argument about the supposed patriarchal monarchy being supported by the Bible, being supported by God. He starts the section off quasi-dismissively, as a somewhat scold to Mr. Filmer. He says, the creation is exactly described in the scripture, but we know so little of what passed between the finishing of it and the flood that our author may say what he pleases. He can make up whatever pretty stories he wants during this time frame because scriptures don't really speak directly to it. And I may leave him to seek his proofs where he can find them. In the meantime, I utterly deny that any power did remain in the heads of families after the flood. That patriarchal monarchy in any way is supported by the Bible after the flood. He's specifically referring to that time frame. After the flood, that does in the least degree resemble the regal in principle or practice. If in this I am mistaken, such power must have been in Noah and transmitted to one of his sons. And this, in these pages, is where he goes on to explain with these examples how exactly the patriarchal monarchy simply can't be true, or that the Bible, rather, supposedly supports this patriarchal monarchy. Because if it did, Nimrod couldn't have been the first king. He says, as to earthly kings, the first of them was Nimrod, namely Nimrod. That couldn't be the case because Noah had sons that would have inherited the power if the patriarchal monarchy was supported by the Bible. He says, all mankind must have continued under the government of Noah, and that power must have been transmitted to Shem, because Shem was the oldest. This rule, therefore, where the partisans of absolute monarchy fancy to be universal and perpetual, falling out in its first beginning directly contrary to what they assert. So he's saying here, because Nimrod is the first earthly king demonstrated, rather than one of Noah's sons living at the time of Nimrod's reign, because that's not true, because you don't find that in the Bible, then the very first example that should demonstrate the Bible's support for patriarchal monarchy ought to be Shem. And because that's not true in the Bible, then this principle, this this proposition that the Bible supports the patriarchal monarchy is not true, because the Bible actually shows the contrary of what the advocates for patriarchal monarchy suggest would be found in the Bible. He says, "For the scriptures doth not only testify that this kingdom of Nimrod was an usurpation, void of all right, proceeding from the most violent and mischievous vices, but exercised with the utmost fury, that the most wicked man of the accursed race, who set himself up against God and all that is good, could be capable of." The Bible, if in support of patriarchal monarchy, would not show the first earthly king being Nimrod. But the shameless rage of some of these writers, he's referring to Filmer and his cohorts, is such that they rather choose to ascribe the beginning of their idol to this odious violence than to own it from the consent of a willing people. These sycophants are more than willing to go to the extent necessary of advocating their idea that they'll adopt the vicious behaviors of Nimrod before they admit, okay, maybe patriarchal monarchy is not supported in the Bible. He goes on and says, paternal, it is paternal, not patriarchal, please excuse me. They're synonyms, but paternal is the correct term. Paternal monarchy is exercised by the father of the family over his descendants, not over everybody else, which is what he explained happened with Noah, which is what he explained happened with Abraham, and again, provides plentiful examples. He ends it on this note. He says, basically, whichever way you go about interpreting it, the Bible, when trying to apply these same principles, or rather, when trying to apply the principles that the paternal monarchists advocate, they are not demonstrated in the Bible. He says, which way soever therefore the business be turned, whether according to Isaac's blessing, Esau should serve Jacob, or our author's opinion, Jacob must serve Esau, because Esau was the older. Neither of the two was affected in their persons, and the kingdom of two being divided into two, each of them remained Lord of himself. So in summary, what Algernon Sidney said with that conclusion at the forefront of that section is, if paternal monarchy were true, Nimrod would not have been the first king. Which means, since Nimrod was the first earthly king after the flood, then in fact, paternal monarchy is not supported or demonstrated in the Bible. Therefore, rebutting Mr. Filmer and his cohort's proposition that supposedly the Bible supports paternal monarchy. So if you have any questions about what Mr. Sidney was saying there in section 8, maybe questions about what we said in the previous sections, or maybe there's a legal concept you'd like me to cover in a future lecture, go ahead and post those down in the comments, because the entire purpose of the Calhoun School of Law is to equip you with the necessary skills and information, such as this, to combat any sort of lawfare that will be waged against you, your loved ones, or your hard-earned property. So please, if you have any questions, go ahead and post them down in the comments. Excellent. So my name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information that plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and if not, while you're down in the comments, go ahead and let me know how I can do better so I can best serve that purpose of helping you. I hope you'll have a wonderful day, and until I see y'all in the next lecture for the next topic, I bid you all farewell.